All right then. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue. Konnichiwa. It's time for another Arms Inquisition episode 369 on Sunday at the 16th of March 2025. I'm Phil. You're quiet again.
Wrong mic.
I've put Ben's mic up and he's not here. Sorry.
But I'm Matt anyway.
Nice to have you here, Matt. Yeah, Ben's not here. He's poorly today.
He is.
After a rather lavish night out in Lancaster last night.
He wasn't he? Yeah.
Yes, so never mind.
Was it a pub crawl?
We can hold the fort.
It was.
Hey, guess what? We're joined, you might have just heard of by Marchell Abrahams. How you doing, Marchell?
No, I'm fine, thank you. I have to thank you for the mug shot. You've taken 20 years off me. I was very gratified.
You're far too modest. Very, very little work had to be done in pre-production on that. I've got your book here, Marchell.
Oh, yes,
The
good.
Great Migrations to Britain. I'll just throw up a picture. There was one in the intro, but I'll just throw this picture up here just so people can get a good look at it. So that's it. The Great Migrations to Britain of 1527 BC and 485 BC by Marchell Abrahams. And you're here to tell us all about it.
Well, thank you for asking
Isn't that
me.
wonderful?
Oh, we've
Great
lost
surprise.
audio.
Oh, we've lost audio. 1 second. Oh,
We
gosh.
just need to do.
Hang on, Marchell. You now, are you there, Marchell?
Yes,
There
I'm here.
we go.
There we
Definitely, yeah.
go.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
Some reason we have to pull a lead out and plug it back in again periodically,
Just so we can hear you.
just as the guest comes in the stream.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's
we go.
fine. It's all very reminiscent of Britain's hidden history. So I don't know if you ever watched the channel with Ross Broadstock.
I did very,
Everything
very.
could go wrong, went wrong. It was a hoot.
Yeah, I was a bit late to the races on that channel, and it was a case of, for me personally, there was just too much content, too many channels, and I just couldn't keep up
Yeah.
with it all.
I understand.
It's like content overload sometimes. There's so much interesting things to delve
know.
into.
Information overload. It's really thanks to Ross that the book got written at all.
Mm.
If you'd like me to give you a bit of background into how I started, it
Certainly.
really started with Adrian Gilbert's The Holy Kingdom about 20 years ago. And I started amassing as much information about Brutus as I could find. And in those days, you could still either buy Wilson and Blackett's books, because once I finished The Holy Kingdom, I thought, I've got to find out what else these men have written. So I bought one or two of Wilson and Blackett's books, and I got the rest out of the library. And then the library stopped lending them, and they wouldn't tell me why they'd stopped lending them. And they were silly prices on Amazon for anything by Wilson and Blackett. I mean, over £1,000, absolutely
Wow.
out of the question. So I left it for a bit and went on doing my researches. And then I tried again. And to my joy, I found that they'd been produced, edited properly, and reproduced by a small publishing house in the south of Wales called Hieroglyphics. So I wrote and I bought a couple of books, and I got them with the most charming handwritten letter from Ross himself. And he said, come and see us, and we'll come and stay for a bit, and, a few weeks, and we'll do some work together and some interviews and whatnot. And at that time, he had 1,000 subscribers. He's now got well over 10,000. And so off we went to South Wales, and we stayed not for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. We ended up staying for 8 months. And I basically got the draft of the Great Migrations, first draft of Great Migrations written in that time. And he was going to edit it and publish it for me. And then, alas, we lost him. So I had to do the whole damn thing myself. And it was a challenge, especially the index. But that's why it's dedicated to him, because I owe it all to him. It wouldn't have got written without him.
Yeah, whenever I always felt like I had so much to catch up on. He'd put so many videos out there that you felt like if you were late to the game like me, that really you need to go back to the beginning.
Oh, yes.
And catch
I mean,
up.
if you were involved, as I was, I still felt like that, as my mind moves a lot slower than his did. And although he really was a first-class interviewer, looking back, he never jumped in. He never. Paul Smith, the Esoteric Explorers, another really good interviewer. And Ross was a superb interviewer, so he got one talking, and that was fine. But my mind moved far more slowly than his did. He used to be able to take in so many subjects. It was almost as though he felt he had to cram everything in. I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was really, I don't know if surprised is the right word. When I started reading your book, you reference Lawrence Waddell.
Oh,
And
yes.
I read the Phoenician Origins book maybe 18 months ago, Phoenician
Yeah.
Origins of the Britons. I thought, wow, this is interesting, because I found that book incredibly compelling. He was talking about these ancient coins, pre-Roman coins, and
Oh, yes. And he's got another book about the Phoenician origins of our language and alphabet. And the British Edda is an absolutely astonishing work of translation and recollation. Everybody talks about poor old Snorri Sturluson, I think I've pronounced it properly, who was the 13th century Icelandic man who collated all these poems into what he called the Edda. But actually, Waddle shows that it's another British history book.
really,
And the fact that the mainstream don't like him was enough for me to give him serious attention. And he never failed me. Every time I wanted to know something, there was Waddle with the answer.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You find these books, and it's often tempting to go to just Goodreads and read reviews, or go to the web and look for reviews, and the vitriol that people
I know.
throw at certain authors is quite astounding, really, just for writing about creating opinions that people just find unpalatable for some
I know.
reason.
It's so easy to bring someone down with an unthought out or even a deliberately nasty comment or review. It's quite savage, the world out there. And I had somebody made a remark about the Great Migrations, which was so scurrilous and so funny. I actually put it up on my website as a formal review.
Yeah.
So I think that's the only way to treat it. You have to acknowledge it and think, actually that says so much more about you than it ever could about me or about Waddle or whatever, whoever it is we're looking at, and you just tie a knot and go on. You have to.
Yeah.
If you pay too much attention to the naysayers, we'd never get anything revised or written, would we?
No, true. And we have this sort of gaping hole, because I'm a big fan of classical history. I like try and read quite a bit about the Romans and whatnot. And we have this this kind of conception here in Britain that basically British history starts with Julius Caesar in 50 BC or whatever. And we seem to sort of throw under the bus any history that is pre-Roman. It's like we sort of delegitimize it. It's like there's this dividing line, and then as soon as the Romans start writing, we've got Caesar's journals home.
Odd that I haven't quite got to the bottom of that. I remember when I was at school, and we were taught perfectly orthodox conventional history like anybody else. I remember thinking how boring this is. None of it resonates. And then the occasional little tiny snippet of true British history would seep in, and instantly the whole thing came alive. There was a sort of black hole, as you say, before the Romans. And what I found during the course of my research is it's so odd. If you look at Wikipedia, which has its uses, I have to say it has its uses. They talk about our British kings as being legendary or semi-legendary, and then they give you 4 or 5 paragraphs about what this fellow actually did, and it's all provable. So how on earth can they equate the provable doings of a man who lived 2,000 years ago, let us say, with the fact that he's supposed to be semi-legendary? They don't make sense. They don't follow their own thoughts, their own thought processes through. So that's another minefield that you have to negotiate. It's all very exhausting.
And it's quite, I imagine it's incredibly perilous because, I mean, just going back to the book title, the first migration that you talk about is 1527 BC,
Yeah.
like deep
Yes.
into the Bronze Age. How
Yes.
can, tell us a bit about that migration and how you're able to piece any kind of narrative together, really.
That was quite astonishing journey. I started with the genealogy that Wilson and Blackett use in the Holy Kingdom. No, it's not in the Holy Kingdom. It's in one of their own books. I forget which for the time being.
Mm.
And it says that Efrog was 500 years after the coming of the Cimbric nation. Well, I worked out that the name Cimbric, Cimbric, is actually the same word as Sumeric, Sumeric. And that's the coming of Albine. So as Efrog was round about 1527, that means she was here, 1027, that means she came here in 1527 BC. And that's why I was able to be so precise about the date. And when I was testing all the generations and the dates, I mean, the dates are purely speculative, obviously. I assigned, I think it was about 25 years per king. Some of those kings will have reigned for 6 months, other for 4 years. Some people reigned for 60 or 70 years. So the average worked out at about 25, 26 years per generation. And it took me right the way back to the date given for the flood in the Linda book. Now, at this stage in the game, I don't know if that's actually the correct flood. There's been more than one flood, apparently.
Okay.
So I'm having to work that out for my next book, Finding the Phoenix, and correlate it with returns of comets and things like that, which is not really my field. But there you are. So that's how I was able to be really precise about the date of Albine. I gave her, I think it was 30 to 40 years to cross that landmass all the way from Sumer to Britain, which I think is reasonable because they were going at walking pace and they will have rested at times. And, during the winter, they won't have moved much. And people will have wanted to stay behind, and there will have been all sorts of disasters and floods and goodness knows on the way. So I gave him 40 years, which seemed about reasonable, and it tied in very nicely with the Santorini explosion, which was a mega disaster in the ancient world. It was bigger than, I think it was 15 Krakatoas, something like that. Sorry, my memory for numbers is not awfully good. So if I've contradicted what's in the book, you'll have to forgive me. That's more likely to be right than this is. So yes, it coincided with the Santorini explosion, and they will have had many warnings of that explosion, as pretty much as we're seeing now with all the earthquakes and magma upheavals and then disappearances and all the strange vibrations that Earth gives off at a time like that. They will have had warning that something huge was about to happen. And then the correlation between her migration and Abraham's, it really struck me. Is it actually likely that there's going to be 2 migrations of that magnitude from the same country at the same time? And I thought, no, I don't think that's very likely at all. I think it was one migration. And then when I started digging into the meaning of the name Abraham and its significance to Britain, which is considerable, it's all seemed to tie in that it was one migration. And this name Abraham is somehow connected to Albine. Now, with a book of this scope, one isn't able to go into the amount of detail one would like to at the time, but I do propose to go into a great deal more detail about Albine and her journey and her origins and what she did when she got here, and also the same with Brutus. But in the Great Migrations, I was just concerned to set down as much I'll have to call it evidence, as much evidence as I could find that this migration happened. It was possible. It left traces, and it's actually all there in the British records. But watch this space for a separate biography of her one of these days. I'll have to live till I'm about 170, I think, to get all these books written. But yes, a separate biography of her with much more detail is in the pipeline at some point.
So this migration, you're tying in, because my biblical history is not great, but Abraham was he located in, was it called Ur of the Chaldees? Like
That's
the
right, yes, and it's some people think it was the Ur in the north, because there were two.
Right.
But from my researches, it's and I think this is the favoured view, not that that means much, because as we know, mainstream they favour what pays them to favour. But it seems to be the Ur in the south. And that's where Abraham, and also Abraham is described, he's not a prince of Ur, but he's an inhabitant of Ur in the Quran. And again, the Quran, one doesn't want to take that too literally, but it was all helpful. I haven't correlated the names Abraham and Albine, which is, again, something I wish to do. But as I say, the detail is there to be gone into at some time in the future.
Yeah, well, you described that there's sort of remnants that are dropped off during this
Yes.
migration before Albine actually lands in Norfolk, is it?
She landed all around the coast.
Right.
She landed as far as the Humber. All the names right the way round the coast of East Anglia, Kent, Sussex, all the way down. They are redolent of her and her Sumerian origins. Places like Dungeness, Lyd, which is the same name as our King Lud, Lyd, it's pronounced in Welsh, L-U-D or L-L-U-D, Llyd. And Dungy Head, for example. So the names are all there around the coast. Oh, Camber Sands. I think I go into it all. I think I list them in the book. But yes, there was a very fascinating find of some boats from her era in the Humber. And they began to excavate, and they managed to date them a bit. And then the war broke out, so they had to stop. And then there's the Dover boat as well,
Yeah.
which is from roughly the same era. But it's, again, without being able to concentrate on her specifically, at the moment, I can not give you the detail I would like to.
Are these the same boats? I just somehow managed to find this book on the shelf. Another one I read not a few years ago, Kingdom of the Ark by Lorraine Evans. It's that.
Yes. No, Wilson and Blackett they took issue with I think her findings in one way or another, but actually what she says about the Ferriby boats is really very interesting. Now, the Humber was the north border of the kingdom that came before England, Lloegrs. And if you look at a map of the British Isles, you'll see that the old border was the Severn, all the way up to the Trent and then into the Humber. And everything east of that was Lloegrs, which we now call England. Everything west of that, and including over the to the north of the Humber, in fact, Cumberland and Northumberland were all Cymry, so all Welsh. And then you've got Alba on the top. And these names have survived. The Scots still call Scotland Alba. And of course, the Welsh still call Wales Cymru, and they still call England Lloegr. It's only the English who have totally forgotten who they really are. The Scots have half forgotten, and they've got the name still, but they don't know why. It's only the Welsh who really remember who they are. So we owe them an enormous debt, because without those Welsh genealogies, I would have had nothing to anchor Oh, there's one other thing that I found to anchor my research, but it was basically the Welsh genealogies, especially for Brutus, who turns up at exactly the right time under the name of Bruce the Warlike. And but the most amazing find, which helped me anchor Albine's story particularly, was Holinshead's King List.
Oh, so who's Hollingshead?
Holinshead. Well, people call him Holinshed, but it's a Midlands name, and it's actually pronounced Holinshead. Holinshead was one of 5 editors who produced the chronicles that appear under his name. It's always called Holinshead's Chronicles, but he was only one of 5 editors, and Shakespeare based most of his British plays on the chronicles. And chronicle is there for a reason, because it's a history. It's a record of what happened through time in our British history. That's why it's called Chronicles. But they weren't Holinshead's Chronicles. What happened was, and this was an amazing find. There was a fellow called John Leland, who was sent by Henry VIII. Again, I've forgotten the dates. I'm sorry, my wretched memory. I have to write things down quick, otherwise they just skate straight past. John Leland was sent by Henry VIII on a very long journey around this country, and his remit was to find all the ancient secrets in the libraries of the big houses and the grand families and monasteries and all that sort of thing. He wanted, Henry said to John Leland, I want everything you can find, all the secrets, I want the genealogies, I want the whole damn lot, and you send it back to me in London. And that's what John Leland did.
This is before Henry VIII got rid of the dissolution of the monasteries and
the year
massive
before
erasure.
the Reformation. The year before the Reformation.
Wow.
So Henry had all those secrets, and then he slaughtered the monastery and the Roman Catholic system in this country.
You can't help wonder if this was premeditated, can you?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, we can always have a guess, can't we? But there they all were, the secrets, and I imagine they're safely in the libraries of goodness knows where, the Buckingham Palace or wherever. But among those documents was the fragments of Berossus. I go into the fragments of Berossus in the book. But Berossus was a Babylonian priest, and he wrote down the history of Sumer as he knew it. And it was then fetched up in the Vatican Library, and a fellow called Annio di Viterbo, sorry, I don't speak Italian, Annio di Viterbo, found this amazing record of Sumerian history on the Vatican shelves, and he set to work to translate it. And that sealed his fate, if you like, because suddenly the Vatican found out what he was doing, and in among that, although this is pure speculation, but in among the fragments of Berossus, I think Viterbo found records of an English, or rather I should say a British connection, but it's not there. That's pure speculation. But there was some reason for the Vatican to, they crushed him, basically. They couldn't crush him while he was alive, but they crushed his reputation after he died. But in that king list, which survived, made its way from John Leland's notes into Holinshead's, so-called Holinshead's Chronicles. In that list, that king list, which goes all the way back to Noah, at exactly the right place is a giant called Albion. Now, in the book, I say, look, this is too much of a coincidence. Here's this fellow Albion, and here in the brute is our Sumerian princess, Albine, as she came to be known in this country. They're both associated with giants. They're both said to have come from overseas, and they're both associated with the number 33. Now, to my way of thinking, and we are talking 3,500 years ago, to my way of thinking, that was too many coincidences. And we were actually looking at a record of the same person, just slightly garbled and with a sex change along the way. You see what I mean? At least on paper. And I've seen this happen before. Wilson and Blackett were particularly good at this with their lists of British kings and how they correlate to Roman emperors. The names, in some cases, are almost the same. But as Alan Wilson said, and I had the huge pleasure of talking to him on the telephone twice, once just after Ross died, and once, of gosh, it must be 15, 17 years ago now. And we talked for ages, and it was just wonderful. But Alan said, if you've got, say, 2 or even 3 names, never mind the chronologies, because the mainstream get chronology very, very confused indeed. So forget the chronologies for the moment. If they've got the same characteristics, the same attributes, and much the same sort of history, in other words, this battle or that conquering or this disaster or whatever, 10 to 1, they're the same person. Now, this was a revelation. It's a very seems a very woolly way of looking at history, but the further back you go, the less clinically and forensically precise you're able to be. And in fact, the more precise you are, the worse it gets. So you have to loosen up a bit. And Wilson and Blackett put together, and again, I've forgotten which book it's in. I'm dreadfully sorry about my memory, but they put together a list of how British kings, let us say 1800 years ago, correlate with Roman emperors, sometimes even to the name. So this is what made me think, right, well, I'm going to go for this because Albion in the king list and Albine in the Brute and in the Welsh genealogies, that to me is evidence when you're talking 3,500 years ago. So that was an amazing coat hanger for me to hang her reconstructed story on. So that, yes, her appearance in the Brute is oh dear, it's rather embarrassing really, because it's so medieval and so florid. But if you get rid of all the they were very oh gosh, what's the word? They moralized all the time. I don't know if you've read medieval poetry, but by gum, does it moralize? And the Brute's no exception. But if you take away the moralizing and the florid sort of medieval gilding and overtones, you're left with this story of a British princess, daughter of a Syrian king. And I prove how her father, how the names match. And again, I know it sounds as though I'm probably making excuses. I'm not, but with a book of this scope, it's impossible to be too detailed.
Yeah.
So that's the best I can do.
Well, you mentioned, was this Sumerian name, is it Taram Dungi, something like
Taram
that?
Dungi, yes. I thought at first it was one of the daughters of Dungi who was named in the what are called the year lists. And we're really lucky for Dungi because we have a year list for his entire reign. And what that means is that the contemporary records list every single year of his reign by achievements. And occasionally a daughter makes it into the list. And Lingwea Mingtashu was named in that list as having married, gosh, I think he was the king of Mahaji. But then I looked further into it, and she didn't seem to be the right one, because Taram Dungi married this fellow of king of Bashime, and their deity was somebody called Shuda. And then when I managed to tie her to Troy in Cambridgeshire, and I found that there was a legend still extant that described far back in history the Lady Shuda. And I thought, well, it is so likely that could have been a distant memory of her. just with the name of the deity attached to her. So it's one of the chapters in the book is the Lady of Shudder, as I've called it. And right next door to where Troy was is a place called Shudi Camps. And it's a sort of, they call it breadcrumbs these days, don't they? But it's a sort of trail of word clues, etymological clues. And the British have this maddening habit of dressing everything up in myth or legend so that it looks like a story, which is why I suppose mainstream write things that happen to us off as myth or legend, because that's how it's been dressed up. Think of the Mabinogi, for example, which were written off by as Welsh fairy tales for children. They're not. They're stories of planetary transits, creation stories, if you like, and they're supremely important. But because they were dressed up in stories, because people remember stories. And the same was true in the Brute. Albine's story was dressed up in other people's tales, and somewhere in the book I mention the origin of our English or British fairy tales. They come from Sumer at the same time that she came here, and they're traceable back to Sumer even further than she lived. So you can trace these fairy tales, especially Jack and the Beanstalk, which is all in the British Edda by Lawrence Waddell. And this has been proved from all sorts of, linguistical reasons and other things, that these fairy tales do stem back to Mesopotamia of about 5,000 years ago. So the idea that Albine, as a little girl, was listening to the same fairy tales, more or less, that we listened to when we were children, is a staggering one, but so it was.
Yeah, there's something quite romantic about
isn't it?
These sort of,
yeah, absolutely romantic.
And
very
these
good,
sort of
foundational
myths. I hesitate to use the word myth, but I mean the famous one is the refugees from the Trojan War. So Rome has a founding myth, doesn't it? Of I think it's Aeneas. Is it Aeneas? Oh, the Aeneid. Yeah, Virgil's Aeneid.
That's
Aeneas.
right.
And we have a correlating one with Brutus of Troy somehow fleeing.
But thereby hung two huge anachronisms, which I was able to disentangle. First of all, the Rome founding myth is that Rome was begun in, let us say, 750, I think it was 756 BC.
Yep.
But Troy did not collapse until 650 BC. So there's no way in which Aeneas could have fled Troy and have his grandson or great-grandson found Rome if Rome was founded before Troy fell. Do you see what I mean?
Well, you have to explain that, because most people, again, going back to the mainstream, would put the fall of Troy contemporaneous with the Bronze Age collapse. So like 1177 BC, something like that. In a
sense, they're right, but they're looking at the wrong Troy. The Troy that fell in about 1150 BC was the Troy on the Gog-Magog Hills in Cambridgeshire. And this has been, I hesitate to use the word proved, but it has been thoroughly and cogently argued by Iman Wilkins in his book Where Troy Once Stood. And he's such a logical thinker, and I do like a logical thinker. There's a lot about the mainstream that is valuable, but equally, there are so many of them that cannot think beyond A to B. They can't seem to make the right connections. And if you've got a foundational myth of somebody fleeing the burning ruins of Troy, and his great-grandson founds Rome after this, and by the way, I'm basing my date for the 650 date for the destruction of Anatolian Troy on Wilson and Blackett's peerless research in their book of the same name. The fall of Troy, 650 BC.
Yep.
And it all ties in with the politics of the time. And again, they, to my mind, they argue it very cogently and very logically. So if you take that as a given, which of course the mainstream don't yet, I hope they will, because it's so beautifully argued. And that's 650 BC. You cannot then have Rome founded in 750 BC, 100 years before Troy fell.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you can, and in fact, if you do a thing with the Etruscan kings, they don't go anything like as far back as 750 BC, because we have a firm date for Brutus, 509, and Brutus was nephew to the last Etruscan king, Lars Porsena. And it's you have to be so careful with the early records, because Livy, on whom I had to rely for Brutus's life when he was still, I won't call him Etruscan, because Rome, we won't call him Roman, but because he was an Etruscan. But they say that Livy said that Brutus died in a battle with his first cousin, and they killed each other in that, the same time the spears met, and that was the end of him and his first cousin. However, the records actually state that first cousin and his brother and his father, Brutus's uncle, the last Etruscan king, they actually fled that battle and went to Cerveteri, where all the Tuscan Etruscan kings' tombs are. I've actually visited it. It's an amazing place, such an atmosphere. So you can't have it both ways. Either the cousin died, or he fled to Cerveteri with his father and brother. And to my way of thinking, Brutus over and over again showed himself as a really cunning and slippery first-class warrior, but a really devious man, for the good, I think, by and large. But I think he staged his own death because he wanted to escape, not only with all the money that his uncle had sequestered, but also he wanted to escape at dead of night and get away and start getting an army together. And the reason for that was at home in Britain, there was this civil war raging. And do you want me to, should I just carry on rambling like this? Or do you want
yeah. I was just waiting for you to bring up the Ark of the Covenant, but we'll save that for
well, I mean,
we'll save that.
Up the Ark of the Covenant, yes. It had to find its way back to this country somehow. And as I argue, I should have made notes of all the page numbers and things, but in here, I do argue that something went missing from a certain place, and it turned up in another place, something dangerous and protective, a dangerous and protective relic. And there were too many coincidences. Again, I'm very wary of coincidences. I'm just wishing I had, I could find it if you give me a couple of minutes to find it.
What is it you're looking for?
Well, I'm looking for where I wrote exactly where, exactly what there were 4 coincidences that happened at the same time.
Right.
And, when something disappears from one country, a man or an artifact disappears from one place, and it disappears from the records of one country, and something equally dangerous or important, or a man with the same attributes turns up in the records of another country, 10 to 1, it's the same thing we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I think you made that clear.
Oh, I hope I did, because I don't know if I'm making it very clear at the moment. So yes, if indeed he did flee with the Ark of the Covenant, then it would explain absolutely why he was able to gather this enormous army to himself in Epirus, which is.
Well, this is where Alexander's mum was from. Epirus, isn't it?
Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know, but don't trust me. Whatever you do. It's close to Macedon, isn't it? It's to the northwest of Macedon, I think, isn't it? Epirus.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at Corfu, Epirus is exactly dead opposite the the
Right.
north of Corfu. And that's where Brutus remained, gathering bands of Trojans and forming this army, and basically taking over everything and everybody, including the king's daughter. He left his first wife behind in Rome, having executed his two sons for backing their uncle, or great uncle, I should say. And so he was without an heir. So he found another princess to marry, who was, I think, much younger than he was, and he created this enormous army, and he brought it back to Britain.
Can I get this? Can I just go over this chain of events? So Brutus is he fleeing the second Trojan War, the 650 BC?
No, he's beyond. He's much later than that.
Much later.
He was a youngish man in 509 BC when he became first co-consul of Rome with Collatinus.
Right. So he's an Etruscan. Is it an Etruscan?
Actually, technically speaking, he's an Oscan, but it's like saying there's a difference between the English and the Welsh. We're actually very closely connected, but we're two slightly separate people. He was an Oscan.
So he's in Rome, or let's just say
he's in Rome, yes. But you see, Rome had only been around for about 150 years by then, and it was still it was governed by Etruscan kings. It was they spoke Etruscan, and the people spoke. I suppose the ordinary man in the street would have spoken what came to be Latin, but then Old Latin was very, very similar to Etruscan, and they used the same alphabet.
Right. So why is he? Is there a civil war happening? Is that why he has to leave?
There's a civil war happening in Britain, and because the king has died, King Gorvod died, leaving two twin sons, fair and poor. The names are actually very significant. The British records call them Ferrex, which means king fair, and Porrex, king poor. They fought like jackals over the throne, and the whole country descended into civil war. And basically, they were kicked out of the country, and it was decided that even if either of them married and had children, that line was never to rule in Britain again. So there you were, Britain without any form of governance whatsoever, absolute anarchy.
Right.
And there was Brutus, lineal descendant of King Lear. And we forget that the world was actually far more connected than we give it credit for. And although it will have taken some time, there were comings and goings between the Mediterranean and here. Look at the Phoenicians, who traded with us for tin thousands of years before Brutus.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the British will have been keeping an eye on what was going on in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean will have been looking to Britain for some sort of help, and they were not able to give help because of the Civil War. And Brutus, as lineal descendant and a very warlike and exceedingly capable leader, the Wellington of his day, if you like, he brought this army back to Britain and quelled the Civil War and became sovereign paramount. But he was not in 1100. This is the other anachronism that I was able to sort out, because in the British records, the Welsh genealogies, he is at exactly the right time, in about 485 BC. He was about 60-ish when he came to this country, still vigorous, still fully capable of quelling a civil war, and also fully capable of fathering more children, which he did. He had 3 more sons with his young wife that he brought with him from Epirus. And they were given the names of the 3 Pacific tribes that had inhabited these lands since Albine's time. Mm-hmm. And that was Lloegr, Camber or Camriw, the name varies a lot, and Alba for Scotland. So those three boys were given the 3 names of the 3 Pacific tribes. You know about the Arwen, do you?
Oh, is that like is that from Druidic?
It is, yes. It's the
it's like the force, isn't it? Isn't it like the force?
It's the crane's foot. It's the 3 prongs, and it's I hope I don't upset any watching Christians if I say there is a connection with the Trinity of the Christian religion, because it's a 3-in-1. And the Druids knew much more about these sort of esoteric subjects than, I'm sorry to say, being a Christian. Modern Christianity doesn't know much about these really esoteric, deep spiritual meanings. But the Druids did know. And so it was decided when Albine got here in 1527 BC that they should, the 3 Pacific tribes should each have their part of Britain, but rather as we are today, it would be one nation with 3, so not separations, 3 sub-identities, if you like.
Right. Yeah. Because again, going back to the Roman histories, we're taught about these who knows how many tribes, you know, like the Brigantes and the Iceni and all, and it paints a picture of Britain being very much divided, tribal. I don't know if that's the right sort of characterization.
Well, I wouldn't say that's wrong, because one of our besetting sins was infighting. And instead of banding together one tribe with another to repel the Romans, we turned on each other. And we've been doing it ever since. I hope we learn to stop soon, because there are all sorts of enemies out there who really need us to present a united face against them. The enemies within as well, and we need to present a united face. It doesn't matter what background we're from, which part of the country we're from. We're British. This is our land, and we need to stick together. That's what I say.
Yeah, very well put. I think we need to go back to Troy and sort of. I want to hear more about this separation between sort of Troy 1 and Troy 2, and.
Oh yes, right. Well, if you read the British Edda by, let me see if I can find it. Wait a second.
L.A. Waddle.
Yes.
W-A-D-D-E.
He was a Scot, a good Scot, and rather like the name Liddell. Oh bother! I had it out to show you, and now I can't find it. Rather like the name Liddell, it's actually pronounced Waddle rather than Waddell.
Right.
I the English like to put an L on. Just my name is pronounced Marchell. Anyway, yes. If you read his magnificent translation, the British Edda, and he proves so beautifully that this is actually a British history book, again done up in rhyme and stories, because it makes it so much easier to remember.
Yeah.
The days before everybody wrote.
I mean, they probably would have been songs originally, wouldn't they?
Oh, they'd have sung it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And he talks of King Adam Thor, who came from the Danube area, and he set up his first kingdom at Troy. And this marches beautifully with the dates of what is called Troy Naught. Now, they found, as you're probably aware at Hisarlik, they found layer upon layer upon layer of building there, which goes all the way back.
This is Schliemann's famous finding of Troy in Anatolia. Yeah,
absolutely. But I mean, I don't know how many layers there are, 7 or 8 layers of it.
He went through all of them in one go, I think.
He did. He sliced away through. But at the bottom is King Adam Thor's original Troy. And then for some reason, I can't remember why, that got squashed. And he rebuilt his capital at Hattusha.
That'd be Hittite. That'd be like Hittite capital, wouldn't it?
Hattusa. That's right. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And so that was the first Troy. Hisarlik was the first Troy.
Right.
And there are Troys all over the world, we have to remember. And again, this is another question which either I can go into, or I hope somebody picks it up and runs with it and starts doing some really in-depth research. I've joined the dots together, but really all I've done is lay the foundations. This needs serious lifelong study. Everything that I've found, I've just laid I've just stitched the garment back together. People need to go and really find the detail. But when Albine came here, now the name Troy is very interesting, because it's related to the word to turn. And if you have the power to turn, which is life, because one side is longer than the other, so it can't help but turn. That's the spark of life. And she, I think, either she found Troy already on the Gog Magog hills, pretty damaged by the flood, of course, or and she rebuilt it, or she built it from scratch. I have no idea, because to find that out, you'd have to get probably even beneath Wandlebury Ring. You'd need to get beneath the roads. You'd have to go deep, deep down to find that out. But it's built on chalk, which is a very significant factor. And that Troy was lasted until about 1150 BC, when it was destroyed, pun not intended, by, as Iman Wilkins puts it, a confederation of European kings. Now, he thinks that the reason for that was trade routes, and he might well have been right. But if you go all the way back, there is a continuing history of warfare between what you might call one side of the pendulum and the other side. It's as though one hand can't help fighting the other, and the confederation of European kings, continental kings, was drawn from the people left, the remnants, as I think you put it, of people left behind on Albine's migration. And I put in my book that there is an even better reason why they wanted to crush Troy, because the Trojans had some access to some ancient knowledge or ancient technology that the Confederation of Continental Kings did not have. So there was a lot of jealousy and a lot of fear. And anyway, one way or another, that Troy was completely razed, R-A-Z-E-D. And they took about 20 years to recover, and then they went south and started to build new Troy on the banks of the Walbrook and the Thames. And this fits very nicely with the British records. British records do get their chronologies right more often than they get them wrong. So sometimes you can rely on it, especially when it's corroborated by something else. At other times, you have to be really careful.
Right, so there's some British chronologies that give the founding of London as around 1130
yes. Yeah,
BC.
I mean, in Charles II's time, no, even earlier, Agas, Elizabeth's time, the founding of London is given as 1130, and it fits perfectly. When you've had your entire way of life, your entire capital city, which Troy was, completely smashed to fragments, it's going to take you a considerable amount of time to gather yourselves together, your own little remnant, and go and find the strength and the courage to go and start again somewhere else.
It makes you...
Yes, I think 20 years is not unreasonable between the destruction of Old Troy in Cambridgeshire and the building of New Troy, which we now call London.
It kind of makes me wonder, though, why this confederation wouldn't finish the job, if you will.
I think they thought they had finished the job.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
There wasn't a stone left, except possibly the stones I found in the corner of that field. Ooh. I don't know if you remember in the book, but I was told we saw some stones just lying, dressed stones, big ashlars lying in the corner of a field in Great Shelford, which is the village on the southwest side of where Troy stood. And somebody saw us looking at them, and I said, "Do you know who these belong to?" Oh, they said, Porterhouse College, Cambridge. Sorry, I used to read Blot on the Landscape, Peterhouse College, Cambridge. And so I wrote to Peterhouse saying, "Do you know anything about these blocks of ashlars? Because I was told they're kept there and you come and chip bits off to repair gargoyles and so forth." And the archivist at Peterhouse had never heard of anything like that. We don't own any stones in Great Shelford, and we certainly don't come and chip bits off them. So I would adore to think those stones are all that's left of Troy. There is one other bit of Troy that is still visible to this very day, and that is the pedestal stone from the temple. And this was one of, I think, if I never write another book or never live to do anything useful with the rest of my life, this will, I think, be my my most favorite bit of research, because the Palladium, it was called the Palladium of Athena, and it was actually the pedestal of the temple at Troy, and they lugged it all the way, made of stone. They lugged it all the way to London, and they set it up in what is now Cannon Street, and it is called London Stone. Now, when I set to work to find out whether I'd actually lost my marbles or could this possibly be true, the first thing I wanted to know was, what is the stone? What is it made of? And I found out Clipsham limestone. Oh, bother, thought I, Gog Magog Hills made of chalk. That's a nuisance. Anyway, I found a geological map. 4 miles, 3 or 4 miles north of Cambridge is a seam of Clipsham limestone. So that temple, and also here's another thing, being as they were much closer to the source than we are now, they would have been far more aware of the properties inherent in different stones. I mean, we know that radon comes from granite, for example, but they would have known that a temple pedestal needs to be made of a certain stone, and there was Clipsham limestone. And the reason why I know this didn't come from Hisarlik is because nowhere in that part of Anatolia is a seam of Clipsham limestone or anything approaching it. So I thought, well, that's it. There's my proof. So if you go to whichever bank, it used to be the Bank of Hong Kong, Shanghai, I don't know where it is now, but you can still see the capstone of London Stone. Now, the rest of it is buried deep beneath Cannon Street, and it's still there.
Wow.
And that is London's, in fact, Loiga's founding stone. And it is so supremely important, and it's had its head cut off.
Yeah, it's only about 12-inch square, something like that, isn't
Oh,
it?
18 by 9 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
But
that's still visible. You can still go and see the capstone of London Stone. And that is Clipsham limestone, and it came from just north of Old Troy.
At the base of the Gog Magog Hills.
Yes, the northwest, northeast, east, west, to the north of Troy, yes.
What's the chances of digging up Cannon Street, do you think?
Oh, please do, let's. Yeah. One day it might happen. Like the Brutus Stone. I don't know if you know about the Brutus Stone, do you, in Totnes?
No, refresh our memory.
Well, Brutus is said by Geoffrey of Monmouth to have landed in Totnes. Well, actually he didn't, because he wouldn't have been able to sail his fleet up the Dart. What he did, according to Morgan, was to land at Torbay. Now, I know that's like landing at Skegness or, I don't know, Scarborough, but land at Torbay he did, and went across inland a little bit to Totnes, and founded Totnes where the tide stops. And these ebbs and flows were really very important to the British. And halfway up Fore Street, which is at an angle to the river, is a funny little sort of kidney-shaped stone set flush with the pavement. And it doesn't look like very much, and it's got a curly blue shield which says the Brutus Stone, helpfully with an arrow. And I wrote a novel called Nighthawk, which is set in Totnes, and it's all about people digging up things illegally. And in it, I have the Brutus Stone as a monolith, because, you know, first thing a Bronze Age prince does is set up a monolith. You know, Brutus was here, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I would love to think that there's 9 or so feet of the Brutus Stone hidden under Fore Street, because think of all the silt and all the deposits over 2,500 years that would have caused the road level to rise and rise and rise. Eventually that stone got buried. We see this, it happens. I wrote a military biography some years ago, 20 years ago now. And I had to go and find his grave, and it hadn't been touched since the day he was buried. And he only died in 1862, this fellow I was writing about, 6 inches of soil over his grave. And he only died in 1862. So you can imagine what 2,500 years worth of autumns and silt and whatnot would have done to the Brutus stone. So, yes, I can't find anything I want to show you.
It's fine. Don't worry
Show
about
you
it.
Nighthawk, show you Nighthawk as well, but I can't.
I shall. I think
it's on the website. Have a look on my website if you haven't already.
I was going to say, I think I was just wondering what I've actually put in the description. I know I've linked to your YouTube channel, but where do people go to buy your books?
Marchell? It's I think I've got a link on the YouTube channel actually, but I'll tell you, it's williamcongreve.co.uk, and Congreve is Congreve, all elided, williamcongreve.co.uk.
And because we've gone over an hour somehow already,
we have,
Marchell,
yes.
yeah. And I wanted to, because you mentioned it several times in your book, it's quite exciting, this Finding the Phoenix, your next book.
Oh, yes.
And I get the impression it's going to be a bit more esoteric, maybe, dealing a bit more in symbolism and stuff like that.
Yes, although, again, our ancestors were very much better at being grounded in the sort of spiritualism that they took for granted as real, and also not having any difficulty correlating that with what happened in the everyday. I hope that makes sense. Yes, it will be more esoteric. The further back in time you go, you can't help that, because they lived religion in a way that we don't.
Right, yeah. Things have changed so much since the Enlightenment, haven't they? It was a big change.
They had a very sensible way of looking at things. They were both, their imagination was grounded in spiritual reality for them. And so they didn't have to make things up the way we do. And also they reasoned differently. Their logic was different from ours. We have this awful sort of arid, sterile reason allied to a completely untrammeled imagination, and the result is a nightmare sometimes, especially in a mainstream academic.
How far off do you think you are with the book?
Can you ask me another question, please?
Gosh, you're teasing me, because I'm waiting for it to come out.
I know, really sorry, but there's such... Can I swear? It's past now. They're such buggers to write these books. They really are. You've no idea. Yeah. Because the one thing one's mind wants to do is to dart off down all these promising corridors, and I have to reel myself back in. You stick to the facts, and I'm still at the note-taking stage, but most of it is down. It's just a question of organizing it, and then of course I've got to do the index.
Oh.
I'm doing my best, but I had hoped it would be out by Easter, but there's been so much else going on and going wrong. You know how it does in life sometimes, and it just takes up all one's time and brain. So no, it won't be out at Easter. I'm really sorry.
That's fine.
I'll do my best.
You really don't need to apologise. I can't imagine how much work goes into writing a book like this. It boggles my mind. I won't have anything like this.
If I could just show you before we go, wrap this up. This is my edition, my copy of The Great Migrations, and you'll see all my post-it notes and a whole lot of notes throughout the book of, you've got this wrong, it should be this. So it's all going, all the corrections had to go into the second edition. But in my defense, I was bereft quite literally of a dear friend and my editor and my publisher all in one go. So I had to turn to and do the thing myself. So there we are. It's not a bad job, I think.
I think it's fantastic, and it's very dense. There's so much information in there.
Yes,
people are interested in.
Help that. The last thing I wanted was to pad it. I was taught at school, don't waffle. If you've got nothing to say, just don't say anything. But there was so much to discover, and I felt at times that it was like trying to stuff a duvet into a pillowcase. There was just information everywhere, and I had to be quite disciplined with myself. Otherwise, I could have just gone on until 600 pages quite happily. But I thought, no, leave that aside. The more esoteric side, leave side of things, leave it aside, and it'll go into Finding the Phoenix.
Well, on that note, I think we should let you go, Marchell. I think we've taken up enough of your time.
Oh, it's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
I've got a list here. We haven't talked about Hebrews, the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Oh, yes.
We haven't talked about the Iceni, really. All sorts of things. So you're going to have to come back further down the line.
I'd adore to come back. Yes, please. I'd love that. Thank you very, very much.
That'd be really great. So, yeah, fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Marchell. It's been an absolute delight.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. And thank you for the support and the plugs and everything. It's been brilliant.
If you want to see more of Marchell's material, you've got your own YouTube channel, and you've done quite a bit with Paul, haven't you, the Esoteric Explorer?
I have, and there's all the interviews I did with Ross on the Britain's Hidden History channel.
Oh, wow.
As well. The link is on my YouTube site, so have a look at that. I've also got one or two other brilliant people like Robert Tye, who isn't getting nearly the coverage he deserves. He's an absolute genius with Troy Weights and Measures, and that is such a wonderful subject. And he makes it so even a linguist like me, who doesn't like numbers, I can understand it. And his link is also there, and one or two others as well, like Hugh Evans. It's all good stuff.
Excellent. Well, we'll let you go. Thanks, Marchell. I'll drop you an email tomorrow. And
yes, do.
And because like these other names you just mentioned, we will love this stuff. We'd like to hook up with these people and maybe give them a bit of exposure. The more we join the dots, the better, because there are some really excellent people out there doing the work, the numerology work. It's Hugh Evans with his star maps. That's not my field. I'm in my field. Hugh Evans is in his, and we need to join the dots. And it'll be brilliant. Yeah, synthesize. That's the word, I think. Yeah. Emphasize. Synthesize. Synthesize. Right, beg your pardon. Yeah. Yes, synthesize. Yes, absolutely. A big, massive dot to dot. Right. Thanks, Marchell. Take care. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye. Goodbye. You're welcome. For those of you watching live, we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Do a bit of news. Yeah, we will. All right. Yeah. Check out the links in the show notes and follow up with Marchell. Get the book and all the rest of it. Ta-ra for now. Bye.